Thank you. Thank you so much, Carol. Greetings, everyone. My name's Margaret Kimberley, and I'd first like to thank the London Region Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament for giving me the opportunity to discuss this very important issue, global Britain versus real security. I'm not from the UK, but that's just as well, actually. I'm from the United States, the country which the UK follows in every aspect of its foreign policy decision-making. And that gives me an important perspective on these issues. When I first heard the term global Britain, I immediately saw it as the type of marketing used in modern day politics that at first glance sounds benign, but knowing its origin makes one suspicious. I wasn't aware that the UK ever ceased to be a global player in the world. The sun never set on the empire, and the impacts of colonization, political, economic, and cultural are still being felt. Britain is a permanent member of the UN Security Council and a nuclear power. So why the phrase global Britain? What does the UK want to influence at this moment, and how does it want to do it? It's important to discuss the impact that past foreign policy decisions have had on present day circumstances. One example is the migration crisis embroiling Britain and France at this moment. Refugees fleeing Western Asia and Africa attempt dangerous crossings of the Mediterranean that are sometimes followed by efforts to reach the UK. This human rights catastrophe is a direct result of an action carried out by global Britain and France in concert with other nations. In 2011, those two countries, the US and the rest of NATO, embarked on a plan to destroy the nation of Libya. They succeeded in doing just that, turning the most prosperous African nation into ruin and killing thousands of people in the process. NATO used jihadist proxies to wage what can only be called a race war against African migrants in that country and against darker-skinned Libyans. The president of Libya was murdered in broad daylight by these same forces. They defeated Libya's military because the UK, US, and France all supported a United Nations Security Council resolution establishing a no-fly zone. To their discredit, China and Russia chose not to veto. Instead, they abstained, and in so doing, may as well have voted yes. The no-fly zone accomplished what it was meant to, the defeat of President Gaddafi's army. After Libya was destroyed, Prime Minister Cameron showed up personally, along with French President Sarkozy, to celebrate on Gaddafi's grave and gloat about their role in a war of aggression. That's global Britain. And that is just one example of why this idea must be opposed. We must be clear that phrases intended to obscure actions of this kind must be condemned along with the acts themselves, even when the outcome is sometimes somewhat comical, as in the case of the AUKUS alliance. AUKUS is another linguistic invention for what already exists. The US, UK, and Australia are already allies. US troops are deployed in Australia, and it's the home of one of the largest US surveillance posts in the world, in the city of Pine Gap. Australia is pursuing an anti-China policy conceived in Washington and London. When the leaders of those countries sought to rebrand what they already had, they ended up cutting France out of a defense deal with Australia. The French president withdrew his ambassadors, and Joe Biden had to apologize to Emmanuel Macron. It would be funny if it weren't so ludicrous, and if it didn't expose the dangers of imperialist powers doing what they've always done. The AUKUS announcement debacle points out something very important. The people who are thought of as world leaders just aren't very smart. Boris Johnson was the driving force behind this effort, and he wasn't savvy enough to see that a submarine deal with Australia would be problematic for France. Joe Biden and his team again displayed monumental incompetence. When Biden met Macron, he ended up mumbling something about thinking his staff had informed the French government about this new badly planned arrangement. And that means our lives are in the hands of people who not only represent the most retrograde forces in the world, but they aren't even very clever either. And I know the nations I've mentioned love to boast endlessly about being democracies. But if the people's needs aren't being met, the word has no meaning. Today, we're discussing security. What is security? The average person feels secure with living wage work, a roof over their heads, medical care when they need it, and opportunities for education. When the people I have mentioned talk about security, they mean nothing of the sort. There's no security for the citizens of these countries who live under the threat of war and who are deliberately deprived of their most basic needs. There is none for the people whose interests are used as pretexts for war. There's none for the people of Syria, for example, which NATO attempted to turn into another Libya. Having failed to do that, they punish with unilateral coercive measures, sanctions, depriving that government of the ability to conduct international financial transactions, and thus depriving people of medical care and food. Sanctions are war by other means, and because they carry out collective punishment against civilian populations, are a violation of the Geneva Conventions. There's no security for people who live in targeted nations. When prime ministers and presidents speak of security, the word is invariably followed by dangerous decision-making. The UK sends vessels to the Black Sea to threaten Russia, or the South China Sea to threaten China. In fact, neither country is really threatened, but they make clear that they will defend their interests. And that means that even nonsensical foreign policy theater can have unforeseen consequences. Global Britain and its partner, the US, are doing that with their talk of a non-existent Russian invasion of Ukraine. For weeks, we've been told that Russia is poised to invade Ukraine, an action that would make no sense and which contradicts everything that Russia has done since the 2014 NATO-led coup against the elected president of that country. Any instigation is being carried out by NATO, who are hoping to use their vassal state Ukraine to attack the breakaway region of the Donbass, which opposes the NATO-installed government. They hope to then goad Russia into defending the Donbass. This plan makes as little sense as the establishment of the AUKUS alliance. We are governed by arrogant people with base motives who also control nuclear stockpiles. There should be negotiations among all nuclear nations to reduce the number of weapons and to ban their use. Instead, we have the Bidens and Johnsons of the world taking actions which increase the likelihood of what must never be considered: nuclear war. We need respect for international law and diplomacy. When London and Washington go on and on about values, it is because they want to continue their acts of illegality and their threats against peace. I come to you today as a coordinating committee member of the Black Alliance for Peace. Our organization was founded in 2017 with the goal of reviving the Black radical tradition in the US. And of course, we oppose imperialism in all of its forms. Most of our members reside in the US, where 60% of federal discretionary spending is allocated for the Defense Department. This imperative to take the people's public resources and to carry out aggression around the world is a bipartisan project in this country. Democrats and Republicans alike funded the Pentagon to the tune of $770 billion in the most recent budget. Even members of Congress who call themselves left or progressives are willing partners in this ongoing disaster. Defense spending increases have the same result everywhere: austerity for human needs, but the war machine is fed. Black Alliance for Peace is dedicated to closing the more than 800 US and NATO military bases all over the world, and to disbanding the US Africa Command, AFRICOM, which destabilizes nations from Libya to Ethiopia and beyond, using a war on terror as a fig leaf to wage wars of terror against the democratic rights of people who live on that continent. Anyone who wants peace and security must be anti-imperialist. The term Global Britain was invented because it sounds better than imperialism. But of course, that is exactly what it describes. We cannot have security of any kind as long as supposed democracies dedicate themselves to carrying out violence all over the planet. Opposing these acts is the only way to achieve true security for us all. Thank you. Thank you very much.